valued viewers. I hope you are all doing very well. Today's question is, do you think the Norfolk and Western J-Class passenger steam locomotive was the best design ever in that era? Let me know in the comments below. So here I will tell you that I do believe the J-Class was the best overall. However, the New York Central's Hudson's and the Hiawatha's version of the Hudson does give it a run for its money, though. So like many of the Norfolk and Westerns locomotives from about 1935 on, the J-Class was designed and built in-house in their Roanoke shops in Virginia. And the J's constituted what the Norfolk and Western called the Big Three, which was the J-Class, the Y-Class, and the A-Class locomotives, with the A and Y's being articulated. And as many of us know, the A and Y classes were some of the best locomotives ever built on the freight handling side of steam locomotives. And the J class was no exception for the passenger. I believe, once again, that it was the overall best passenger locomotive ever built. So during the mid to late 1930s, the Norfolk and Western realized that their K2 and K2A 482 mountain type locomotives could no longer handle the rising demand for passenger traffic once the Great Depression had fully abated. So the Norfolk and Western sought a more powerful and fancy looking passenger locomotive that matched those of the New York Central Hudson's and the Hiawatas of the Milwaukee Road. And as usual, the Norfolk and Western by that time was designing and building their own locomotives, and they just simply weren't going to be outdone by anyone else. So they selected a Northern 484 type, took off its 63-inch diameter driving wheels because they thought that size was inadequate for the grades that the passenger service would have to undertake. And so they fitted it with a 70-inch driver wheels, and those could be counterbalanced against track slippage. And so by the time 1940 comes around, Norfolk and Western passenger car supervisor Franklin Knoll originally drew a design which was based on the Southern Pacific GS class, which is the daylights, like the 4449 and etc. But the Norfolk and Western officials rejected it as too plain looking. Imagine that, a daylight called too plain looking. So again, Norfolk and Western by this time doesn't like being outdone by anyone. So they wanted something more fancy looking. So then Noel comes up with a design that looks very much like a 484 version of the New York Central's Hudson 464, and the Norfolk and Western brass said, no, that's too fancy. We don't like that either. So on the third and final attempt back at the drawing board, Noel then comes up with the design that we are all familiar with, which is the bullet nose design. And that gave the locomotive smoothness and a beauty, along with speed, power, and dependability. His wife, Louise, suggested painting the locomotive with that Tuscan red stripe wrapped with the golden yellow linings and letterings. And the Norfolk and Western officials just loved the thing, and they actually went so far as to say, as to saying it was the most beautiful streamlined steam locomotive they'd ever seen. So in October of 1941, the first Class J passenger locomotive for the Norfolk and Western, number 600, was completed. And it had that streamlined bullet nose with a nifty retractable coupler that could horizontally swing out. And along with that, the headlamp was enclosed within the bullet nose itself. And as usual with the Norfolk and Western design, they spared no expense, and they put Timken roller bearings on everything. Axles, rods, pistons, crossheads, valve gears, wrist pins, you name it. If it could hold a rolling bearing, it had them. So starting with the J-Class number 602, Norfolk and Western put a trailing truck booster on it, which increased the starting tractive effort from 73,300 pounds to 85,800 pounds. And that final number made it the most powerful 484 as far as tractive effort that I've seen thus far. If you've seen something higher, let me know in the comments below. So in December of 1945, the J class had its original 275 pound boiler pressure increased to 300 pounds per square inch boiler pressure. And that is also the highest I've ever seen in a 484. And once again, if you know better, let me know in the comments below. The J class also saw their drawbar horsepower increase from 4,700 horsepower to 5,100 horsepower, and that was at 41 miles an hour. And if all those features and stats didn't wow you, this one might. The driving wheels are actually small for a passenger locomotive, but yet it was, despite that size, the 70-inch size, it could pull a passenger locomotive 100 miles an hour. And to overcome that limitation, the wheelbase was made extremely rigid. Lightweight rods were used, and the counterbalancing was so precise that it could theoretically allow the locomotives to reach speeds up to 140 miles an hour. Now, folks, I just talked about the T1, which is a very unique and special locomotive in my previous video, doing 140 miles. This is a 484 Class J, Northern type, basically, modified Northern type, that's going to do 140 miles an hour. So that's just plain incredible. And one further thing to note about this, in my notes here, I see that the problem with so precise of counterbalancing was the locomotive was sensitive to substandard track. So if you had a track in ill repair, or some curves to it or something like that, the locomotive didn't respond very well to those kind of imperfections. So the track had to be laid out pretty straight and in good repair. A definite speed the J class achieved while pulling a 1,015-ton passenger train was when number 610 was unloaded to the Pennsylvania Railroad, and it hauled that 1,015-ton passenger train at 110 miles an hour. So it was clocked at least at 110 miles an hour, pulling a 15-car, 1,015-ton passenger train. So in my previous T1 video, each of the two prototypes cost $600,000 to construct, with the production models costing in the neighborhood of $250,000. Well, each J class costs no more than $168,550 per locomotive. So in 1950, the last three J locomotives were built, and those numbers were number 611 to number 613. And these three were the last steam locomotive passenger trains built in the United States. And the J class went on to pull the mainline passenger service up till 1958, and they were replaced by GP9 diesel locomotives. So at that time, all the J class began to be removed from service, and all of them were scrapped except for number 611, which is preserved at the Virginia Museum of Transportation in Roanoke, Virginia, and often runs excursion services today. So with that, the following specifications apply to the Norfolk and Westerns Class J passenger steam locomotive. The overall length of the locomotive was 109 feet 2 inches. The width of the locomotive was 11 feet 2 inches, and the height was 16 feet. The axle load was 72,000 pounds. The adhesive weight was 288,000 pounds. The locomotive weighed 494,000 pounds. The tender weighed 378,600 pounds for a total weight of 872,600 pounds. It burned coal. It carried 35 short tons, and originally they had carried 26,000 short tons. The water capacity was 20,000 U.S. gallons, and the fuel consumption was 6.5 short tons of coal per hour, and it burned 11,975 gallons of water an hour. The firebox grade area was 107.7 square feet. The boiler was 92 inches, and the boiler pressure was originally 275 psi and modified to 300 psi. Again, that's the most I've ever seen in a 484. The heating surface was 5,271 square feet. The J-Class had 2 cylinders at 27 inches by 32 inches. They used Baker valve gear. The valve types were piston valves at 14 inches. The maximum speed, confirmed speed was 110 miles an hour, capable of speeds of 140 miles an hour plus. The power output was 5,100 drawbar horsepower. The tractive effort was 80,000 pounds. The factor of adhesion was a average 3.6, and the railroad class was, of course, J. And there were 14 total units built, numbers 600 through 613. They were retired between 1958 and 1959, and as I mentioned, number 611 is preserved in Virginia. And with that, I'll wrap up the video by saying thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed today's content, please subscribe if you haven't done so already. Hit the like button and turn on all of your notifications so you can see everything that we post. And also visit our print shop at Nickel Plate Limited on Etsy.com if you want to support our efforts here on the channel. And we thank you once again.